Good morning, guys. I'm very sorry that I can't be there with you this morning. But what I have done is I have recorded a lesson that you're going to complete now. What I'll be doing is I'll be talking through. Good morning, guys. I'm very sorry that I can't be there with you this morning. But what I have done is I have recorded this lesson. And what I will do is I will be talking through information. And then at certain points in the lesson, I'll ask the teacher who's supervising this to pause the video and give you a bit of time to complete. I believe I've got about 3 or 4 tasks for you to do. Okay. Obviously, because this is a recorded lesson, I don't have any handouts to give you. So it is really, really important you are paying very close to attention to the writing that's on the slides and the things that I am going to be talking about. Okay, so this lesson is going to be all about Norman Britain. What we're going to do in today's lesson is, of course, the do now. So you need to write the date and title, which is on the screen. And then secondly, you just need to answer the following questions. Write them in full sentences, please. And we're going to do this in silence. Okay, so I think this will take us about 7 minutes. So if the teacher could pause the video now, and then in 7 minutes time you should have completed those questions, and we'll go through those together. Okay, hopefully you didn't find that too hard. Let's have a look at the answers now. So if you could green pen your answers as I go through them with you. So question A, it was his older brother was murdered by Ethelred's supporters. Question B, the money that was given to the Vikings to pay them to leave is known as Danegeld. Question C, why did Ethelred make a deal with the Duke of Normandy? It was to prevent the Vikings from launching raids from Normandy. Because remember, Normandy is not that far to sail to England to conduct raids. So they wanted to do that deal to stop the Vikings from coming over. Question D, what happened during the St. Brice's Day massacre? Well, Ethelred ordered the mass killing of any Viking found south of the Danelaw. Remember, the Danelaw is the area where the Vikings were allowed to settle, and that massacre also included women and children as well. It was pretty horrific. Question E, King Forkbeard was particularly angry about the massacre because amongst the victims was his sister. And remember, that encouraged him to launch another final invasion of England. And then lastly, who became king after Forkbeard? It was Canute. So give yourself some green ticks and give yourself a mark out of 6, and then we'll move on to the next part of the lesson. Okay, so in today's lesson, we're looking at Norman Britain. And the first thing we're going to look at is how did William the Conqueror eventually become the King of England? But we're going to start off with another king, actually, called King Edward the Confessor. And King Edward the Confessor was the king who took over the throne after Canute. Okay, some things to know about him are that in many ways he was very much more French than he was English. He'd spent a lot of time in Normandy. He spoke French better than he actually did English. And interestingly enough, he was very close friends with William of Normandy. And William of Normandy is the person that we now know as William the Conqueror. However, in 1066, King Edward the Confessor dies, but he dies without an heir to the throne. So he had not had any children, so he dies without an heir. Here's what I'd like you to do now. I'd like you to think about this question on your own for a moment. Why is Edward's death going to cause problems in England? Just have a think about that on your own. Okay, and then we're going to pause the video for 1 minute and you're going to turn and talk to your partner and discuss this question. So if you could pause the video now for 1 minute, turn and talk to your partner and discuss this question. Okay, hopefully you've had a very interesting discussion about this question. It'd be great to hear your thoughts. Shame I can't hear them. But the main problem that this is going to cause is that England is going to be divided about who is going to be the next king. Okay, remember throughout history, whenever a king or a queen dies, and it's not obvious who is going to be the next ruler, often it results in conflict and many times like civil war. So this is going to cause a lot of problems, there not being a very clear successor to the throne. And remember, a successor is someone who's going to take power after someone dies or someone leaves a particular job. So after Edward the Confessor dies, there are three main contenders for the throne. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all three of them and look at why they felt that they should be the next king of England. It's really important you pay very close attention to why they wanted to be king or why they thought they should be king, because in a moment you're going to be completing a written task about this. So let's start off with the main man, William of Normandy. Remember, William of Normandy is the guy who eventually will be known as William the Conqueror, the only person who has ever successfully invaded and conquered England. So some things to know about William. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, he was a very close friend of Edward. And he claimed that Edward, sorry, it says William on there, it should say Edward. He claimed that Edward had promised him the throne. Okay, that's a very big claim. Okay. In addition to that, he also claims that Harold Godwinson, who was his brother-in-law and a very powerful Anglo-Saxon, had agreed to support his claim. Okay, so not only did he say, well, Edward had said I would be king, but also the most powerful Anglo-Saxon in England has said he will support my claim. What we don't know, though, is whether these claims are actually true. If they are true, it's a very strong claim to the throne, isn't it? But we don't know whether that actually is true. Our second contender is a big bad Viking who I struggle to pronounce the name of, but Harald Hardrada. Okay, he was the Viking ruler of Norway, and he also claimed, I'm not sure many people agreed with him, but he claimed he was the king of Denmark. And his claim to the throne was that he believed, as Vikings had conquered and controlled England for many, many years, that he should be England's new king. Okay, so he wasn't related, he hadn't been made any promises. He just felt that, hey, I'm one of the most powerful Vikings. The Vikings have conquered and controlled England for many years. I should have the right to be the next king of England. Okay. And then the final claimant is a guy who I mentioned earlier called Harold Godwinson. He was the most powerful man in England at that time. Okay. And out of these three contenders, he was the only person who was actually English. His claim for the throne is very strong because the Witan, who are a group of England's most powerful nobles, actually wanted him as king. They said, hey, we are the most powerful nobles in England. We would like Harold Godwinson to be our next king. So he's got a very strong claim to the throne in that the most powerful people want him, and he himself is actually English, unlike the other two. So here's what I'd like you to do now. Okay, I'd like you to answer the following questions in your book. For each of the claimants, you are just going to explain why they believed they should have the throne. Okay, I think this will take us approximately, I think you can do this in 5 minutes. So if you could pause the video now for 5 minutes, and you're going to complete those questions in your book. Okay, hopefully you didn't find that too challenging. I'll go through those answers with you now. So, why did William of Normandy believe he should have the throne? Well, he claimed he had been promised the throne by Edward the Confessor, remember, and that Godwinson, Harold Godwinson, had said he would support that claim. Why did Harold Hardrada believe he should have the throne? Well, he believed, as a Viking, the biggest, baddest Viking at that time, he should be king because Vikings had controlled England for many years. Not the strongest claim, if you ask me. And then why did Harold Godwinson believe he should have the throne? Well, he believed it because the Witan, the most powerful nobles in England at that time, wanted him as king. And actually, I'd forgotten one thing I could add to that. Maybe someone in the class knows, but I could also add to that well, he was actually English as well, which strengthened his claim indeed. So here's what I'd like you to do now. On your own, I'd like you to think about which of the three contenders do you believe had the strongest claim to the throne? Okay. And then I'd like you to explain why you think that in your book in, I don't know, 2 to 3 sentences. All right. There's a sentence starter at the bottom of the screen just to help get you started. But decide which of the three contenders do you believe had the strongest claim to the throne. I think this will take no longer than 4 minutes. So whenever you're ready, teacher who's kindly taking this lesson, if you could pause the video for 4 minutes, and then everyone can complete this task. Okay, hopefully you found that nice and easy. There are no wrong answers here, really, unless you just wrote some absolute nonsense, but you're very good historians, so I look forward to reading your opinions. In my view, the person with the strongest claim was actually Harold Godwinson. Okay, he's not got some vague thing like, oh, Edward, he promised me, or he's not just claiming it because he's a Viking. Harold Godwinson had been voted by the most powerful people in England to be the next king, and he's actually English. So, in my view, that's why he actually has the strongest claim to the throne. But as we know, not everything worked out well for Harold Godwinson. So let's find out what happened after Edward dies to the throne. So, after Edward died, literally within days, Harold Godwinson is actually elected king by the Witan. And he takes the throne of England. But very soon after that, the other two claimants find out and they launch their own diabolical plans to try and take the throne for themselves. So Hardrada is the first one to take action, and he invades England, but was defeated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So Hardrada is now out of the picture. William then invades and he defeats Harold in one of the most famous battles in history, the Battle of Hastings. Okay. And again, that's one of the most significant moments in British history because it's the only time England has successfully been invaded by another country. After that, William faces lots of resistance and fighting across the country, but he and his army managed to crush that resistance, and he is crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066. So now England is under the control of the Normans. So in this next part of the lesson, we are going to be looking at how did England change under Norman rule. Once again, it is really important you are super focused and listening to this, as always, because in a moment you're going to have to complete a task where you're going to be describing how England changed under the Normans. Okay, so one of the first things that William did after conquering England was that he gave very important roles in the church to his Norman supporters. One reason why he did this is because obviously at that time religion is very important to people. Okay, so by having Normans in important roles, that gives him a lot of control over the country. The other thing that he did was that he divided up England between his Norman barons and lords, so that the people who were his supporters, the people that were most loyal to him, controlled the different regions of England. Now, they were still facing quite a lot of rebellions and violence, so those Norman barons and lords, they built over 500 Norman castles to keep them safe from the rebels. But the castles also played another important role in that they were sort of a constant reminder to the people of England of the power of the Normans. Okay, you've got to remember, imagine some poor English peasant walking past like a castle like that one that's underneath me every day. That's a constant visual reminder that the Normans are now in control and that they're a pretty powerful group. There were also other changes to England in terms of culture and religion. So one significant change was that French replaced English as the main language used by those in power. So all the barons, nobles, people who ran the country, they did not speak English to each other, they only spoke French. The Normans also built hundreds of new churches, cathedrals, and monasteries. So many of the really quite epic cathedrals that you see across England were originally built by the Normans. Okay, and similar to the castles, they were a constant reminder of the power and influence of the Normans over the English. And then lastly, similar to French replacing English for those in power, hundreds of other French words were also absorbed into the English language, words that we still use today. So, for example, the word soldier, that is a French word that was introduced into the English language, and we now use it and sort of forget and assume that it's an English word, whereas in reality, it is actually a French word. Okay, so Normans have a big impact on England. Normans are put in charge of regions, given important religious roles. They build hundreds of castles. They build hundreds of cathedrals, monasteries, and French is integrated into the language of the powerful. It becomes the main language, but French words are also integrated into our day-to-day language, which is an impact that we still see and use today. So based on that information, I'd now like you to complete the following task. In your books, I'd like you to draw a table like that on the screen. Okay, and what I would do is I would use a whole page of your history book to do this. Okay, what you then need to do is fill in the right hand column based upon what we've just learnt about how the Normans changed things in England. Okay, so I've broken it down into three categories. So power, think about who now has power and how they display that power. Religion, think about who now has the most important jobs and what they're building across the country. And culture, think about language and how that changed under the Normans. Okay, you can write that in full sentences, or I don't mind if you just bullet point those as well. If you're a fast finisher, there's a task at the bottom of the screen where I'd like you to compare the impact of the Normans to that of the Vikings. I think this should take no longer than 10 minutes. So if the teacher in charge could pause the video now for 10 minutes, and then we'll go through the task together afterwards. Okay, let's go through this. I did a little table myself. Here's what I wrote for each of the categories. So power, England was divided between the Norman barons and lords. Of course, they now control all the different regions of England, and they built 500 castles across the country as a display of that power and as a defense against any rebellions. In terms of religion, remember the Normans were given the most important religious roles because that gave them a big influence over the country. And then, of course, they built hundreds of new cathedrals, churches, and monasteries as well as they're religious buildings, but also that links to power as well, because it was also a display of their power and a constant reminder to the poor old peasants of England. And then lastly, in terms of culture, nice easy one this, French becomes the main language and hundreds of French words are absorbed into the English language. Okay, time for the final task of this lesson. Okay, based upon what we have just gone through, I'd like you to think about what do you think was the most significant impact the Normans had on England? Then I'd like you to explain your answer in your book. Okay, I don't want just like one or two sentences. I'd like to see like 3 or 4 sentences, so a paragraph on this. So first you're going to make your point, and then I want lots of explanation about why you think this was the most significant impact. So for example, my one, what do I think? Well, I think the language is probably the most significant impact. And the reason for that is that, well, not only would that have been a huge cultural shift at the time, but also we are still seeing and witnessing and doing it ourselves the impact of that language change today, because those words are still very much incorporated into our language today. Okay, so I think this should probably take around 5 to 8 minutes. Okay, but it's the end of the lesson, so probably just whatever time you have left for this lesson, pause the video now to complete that task. Okay, that brings us to the end of this lesson. Hopefully you haven't found this format too crazy, because we're going to probably have a few more lessons like this. Well done on completing those tasks, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon.